Hello, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be talking about our introductions, right? So at this point, you've outlined your paper, you have your thesis, you've started to build your outline into paragraphs. But how are we going to open the paper, right? So there are countless ways to start a college essay, excuse me. But for this paper, we'll get into those introductory, the more broad world of introductory strategies later on in the course. For now, you're going to choose from one of three options, right? You will either open with a detail from the piece of media that you've chosen to illustrate the American dream, open with a detail from one of our sources, or open with a detail from current events. Let's take a look at what I mean by that. I will share screen with you and just take you through my messy notes. Okay, so so here we have the three ways that you can open your, sorry, my bad. I'm getting ahead of myself. Intro strategy will, you guessed it, mimic paragraph strategy, paragraph structure, right? It's got three parts, just like paragraph structure. It will have your opening strategy, which will be 2 to 3 sentences. It will have your connection to or introduction of readings, 3 sentences, 2 to 3 sentences. And it will have your thesis, right? Those are the 3 elements of your introductory paragraph. So let's look at a few examples of the ways you are able to open your essay in this, open your introduction in this essay. So number one opening strategy, choosing a moment from your illustrative example. And when I say illustrated example, I mean the example that you chose to illustrate the American dream in body paragraph number 1. I think I can never remember how to spell Fievel. And just one thing, the ideas expressed in this video, I think I say this in another video, may or may not be the ideas, my personal opinions. That is not my point. I am a critical thinking teacher, so I'm able to take positions that are not my own and write from that perspective. Do not assume anything that written here is or is not my opinion, okay? So, a moment from your illustrative example. I chose Fievel, An American Tail, which should be italicized, bad teacher, because it is the title of a film. Fievel, An American Tail is a 1986 animated film about mice immigrating to America at the turn of the century. A 1986 animated film about mice immigrating to America at the turn of the century contains an early scene aboard the ship to the States. The mice recall the various political and economic tragedies they are leaving behind in various countries and sing about the dreamland that is America, where there will be streets made of cheese and no cats. So, in about 2 sentences, I have highlighted what I consider to be a good entryway into the American dream, right? You can imagine that later in this introduction, I would talk about how the American dream for many immigrants is an escape from the lives that they knew before, right? But I'm focusing on one scene, one moment. I'm not summarizing the entire film, Fievel, in this paragraph, because that is what I will do in my illustrative paragraph. This is just an introductory strategy, a couple sentences to open your essay, your introduction. You're choosing one specific moment. Let's do another one. Let's say I want to choose a moment from one of the texts that we have read. In her essay, How to Tame a Wild Tongue, poet Gloria Anzaldúa recalls the moment she was told she could not teach Chicano literature. She swore her students to secrecy and taught it anyway, right? So Again, I'm not summarizing the whole essay at the beginning in the introduction. I'm choosing a key moment that I would like to use to open my introduction. You can imagine later in the introduction, I would use, for example, as how people fight for their place at the table, right? But we're not at that part of the introduction yet. Or you could choose a moment from current events. In the 4 years of the Trump presidency, news networks made their best ratings in 20 years, performing moral outrage at his legislative moves, his off the cuff remarks. I think actually off the cuff is written that way. His off the cuff remarks, and most of all, his supporters. In all of their analysis, few of them bothered to answer why so many people voted for him. For clarity, I would say in all of their analysis, few of these uh, news anchors bothered to answer why so many people voted for him. So those are the three things you can choose. You choose one, right? Either choose a moment from your illustrative example, a moment from the texts, or a moment from current events to segue into your connection to the readings, right? So note what I'm going to do here. Now I'm going to connect it to the sources. For our purposes, we're going to I have chosen this strategy for my intro. I've chosen the current events strategy. Connect it to our sources. In a world barreling toward an uncertain future, the unashamed billionaire reminded people of old standards for American success, a model they've been told over and over is unsustainable or unethical or unattainable. 5 years later, Americans are still being asked to trade in the old ideas about success, family structure, and American culture for a newer, seemingly more inclusive model. Mr. Trump's supporters understood that there was nothing wrong with the old model. Okay, can you spot where I mentioned our readings? Right. Can you guess? Can you guess? Can you guess? I mentioned them right here. Americans are being asked to trade in the old ideas about success, family structure, and culture. Old ideas about success, Courtney Martin's The New American Dream. Family structure, Gerstle and Sarkeesian's The Color of Family Ties. And American culture, How to Tame a Wild Tongue. Okay, so I have connected my opening strategy to the readings. I didn't name them yet. I'm going to do that in the body. If you want to name them in your intro, you can, but you'll have to use the full author's name and the full title. For space-saving purposes, I kept it minimal. Now I give my thesis. The American dream does not need to be revised because it has always included people of every race and class, right? So here we go, putting it all together. Oh, right. Also, something I noticed when I was reading through all of your guys' working thesis, some of you wrote entire essays, some of you wrote entire paragraphs. Your thesis statement is 1 to 2 sentences. Note up here, thesis, 1 to 2 sentences, right? It is not a paragraph. Your introduction is a paragraph, but your thesis statement is a sentence or two explaining your overall argument of your paper. So let's read it all together. In the 4 years of the Trump presidency, news networks made their best ratings in 20 years, performing moral outrage at his legislative moves, his off-the-cuff remarks, and most of all, his supporters. In all of their analysis, few of these news anchors bothered to answer why so many people voted for him. In a world barreling toward an uncertain future, the unashamed billionaire reminded people of old standards for American success, a model they've been told over and over is unsustainable or unethical or unattainable. 5 years later, Americans are still being asked to trade in the old ideas about success, family structure, and American culture for a newer, seemingly more inclusive model. Mr. Trump's supporters understood that there was nothing wrong with the old model. The American dream does not need to be revised because it has always included people of every race and class. All right, so that is my example of an introduction and how I want you to structure your introduction. Something to keep in mind. It is very hard to not get preachy, right? We are not making value judgments. We are not saying something is good or bad. We're not saying something is socialist or communist or capitalist, right? We are simply giving our opinion about whether or not the American dream needs to be revised. Avoid getting preachy. Avoid getting emotional, right? Uh, Something to keep in mind. Okay, this video is long enough. Get to work and good luck.